Arriving near the extraction location, Cabrera surveys the surrounding area to see where it would be most defensible. They've arrived a good 10 days before the date that the ship's crew had given them. It was imperative that they find a way to defend themselves until the ship arrived. They began this task by outlining a small outpost nestled up against the side of the cliff face. Every able-bodied person was directed to chop down some trees to give them some lumber to build with. None were particularly skilled at this task, but it was somewhat a matter of life and death, so everyone pitched in nonetheless. Even the children, who were too young to wield an axe, were tasked with gathering the supply of food the group had managed to bring with them, and hauling it into the confines of what would soon become their outpost. Cabrera had chosen this area, as with just a small wall to the south, they could cut off one of the avenues of attack for any stray ducks that may approach the area, looking for some tasty human flesh. Unfortunately, that was about the end of the defences that the natural structures in the area could offer, so they would need to use a fair bit of lumber to build the rest of the outpost's walls. Lumpy considered fully enclosing the outpost, however, if they did that, then a large group of ducks may mass outside the walls without them noticing. The rescue ships wouldn't be able to land inside the outpost as it was too confined by the mountain, so the group would inevitably need to leave the outpost to reach their rescue. On this basis, it made sense for them to leave the outpost open, so as to entice any ducks in the area to attack them, so that they could thin their numbers before they had to make a dash for the rescue ships. Thankfully, the area had plenty of wood, so they were able to plan out a room they could sleep in. In such dire circumstances, the happiness of the people may seem like a secondary concern. However, if one of them were to suffer a mental breakdown and wander out into the darkness on their own, there would be little chance of saving them. So investing a little time into their continued mental stability was definitely worth the effort. By the end of the first day, the group had already almost completed the outpost's initial walls. Before leaving the city, the group had managed to bundle up a lot of components to take with them, but they weren't able to carry any steel, given its weight. However, in a rare stroke of luck, there seemed to be a large vein of steel just outside the outpost that they could mine. The steel and the components would be vital to their survival. Lumpy had hoped to use them to build automated turrets to help defend them from any ducks that enter the area. Cabrera also suggested using some of them to build a few cameras outside of the outpost, so that they could see any ducks approaching from a greater distance and be better prepared. Of course, all of this would require power, so the first step was to build some solar panels and some batteries to run things at night. Things had gone smoothly overnight, and the next morning the group had begun affixing a roof to their shelter. That was when they heard it, the telltale pitter-patter of some little duck feet. The duck went straight for Sanford, who was distracted cutting a tree. Thankfully, Lumpy was more adept in combat situations, and with a quick flick of his rifle, he snapped off a single burst, taking the duck down immediately. It seemed as though this duck had been alone, but if one of them had found the shelter, more would arrive, as surely as a snowman melts in the desert. On the assumption that more ducks would be arriving soon, Cabrera and Trev got to work trying to free some of the steel from the mountain. It wasn't long before they had the steel they needed for the solar panel, and Cabrera wasted no time in putting it together. He then planned out a small wire network, providing power to the shelter for lighting, and to the outer wall of the outpost for some automated defences. Cabrera wasn't interested in committing any war crimes, so he made sure that they had a table and some chairs to eat at. Although, he placed these outside, so that they could enjoy a nice picnic-like atmosphere while the hordes of ducks descended upon them. The next morning started out with some breakfast outside and some games. If you didn't know better, you'd never know that this was a world in the grips of a mallard-induced apocalypse. The ducks, however, refused to be forgotten for long. As Lumpy was out on a morning stroll, he spotted two of the beasts emerging from the bushes in the distance. Due to what he claimed was general morning haziness, and definitely not pants-pooping levels of fear, he seemed incapable of repeating the feat from the previous day, and the ducks got dangerously close. Thankfully, the closer they got, the less accurate he had to be, and he managed to put the duo down before they could get their beaks on him. But it was just as Cabrera had feared. If one duck could find them, the horde could too. Things were only going to get worse before they got better. Taking the two ducks as confirmations of the dangers they faced, the group pressed ahead with their defensive plans, building a small room to store some batteries. As their only power source would be solar, batteries would be essential to ensure their automated defences could protect them even from nighttime raids. Cabrera started to plan out the defences of the outpost. Although they had some steel and components, the thing they really had an abundance of was wood. To take advantage of this, they would construct lines of spikes, which would cause damage to any ducks looking to pass them and hopefully slow any attacks, which would allow more time for the group to fire lead into them. With their pesky human eyes, they couldn't see very far into the murky distance, meaning that if the ducks did arrive, they would have little warning, making it hard to utilise their defences. To this end, they constructed some CCTV cameras on poles outside of the base that could serve as their eyes, allowing them to see further into the landscape. Due to some particularly poor planning, they had tried to create a second solar panel, but had only succeeded in destroying the power line leading to the front defences. At least it wasn't a life or death situation or anything. Lacking the steel to finish the construction of the solar panel, Cabrera demanded that all the able-bodied adults, regardless of their mining skill, begin helping with the steel extraction, so that they could restore full power as soon as possible. With everyone's hard work, they were able to build the second panel the very next morning, providing power to their new camera, and not a second too soon. The camera immediately flagged a group of 4 ducks heading straight for the group. The timing was terrible too, as most of the group were outside of the protection of the outpost, trying to gather together the steel from the mountain. Emerging from the mine, they formed a line and started blasting. There wasn't an insurmountable number of the beasts, so Cabrera was confident they could stand their ground. And on this occasion he was correct, but more ducks were appearing by the day. They would need to be more careful not to get caught unawares again. Just as Cabrera was finishing work on their first automated turret, the cameras flagged up a new threat. Seemingly inspired by the bloodlust of the ducks, a nearby red panda decided that it too wished to taste human flesh. Thankfully, it was no more successful than the last group of ducks had been. The rest of the day goes a lot smoother, with the group mining out most of the nearby steel, and managing to construct a second automated turret. Everybody's moods are getting a little strained, but there isn't a lot that can be done about that. Being stuck in the middle of an apocalypse is bound to get a little stressful for anyone. The following morning starts with the group working on the very last of the steel, but they're soon interrupted by the quacks of approaching doom. Thanks to their new CCTV, they see the ducks approaching, and are able to retreat inside the walls of the outpost before they arrive. There appears to be about 8 ducks this time, meaning that the number of ducks approaching the outpost now outnumber the number of armed adult humans. But thanks to their new defences, and an ever-improving ability to target the small creatures with their weapons, the group are able to defend themselves once more. With the increasing number of ducks becoming aware of their presence, it's becoming more and more risky for the group to perform any tasks that take them outside the protection of the outpost. However, in a monstrous display of do as I say, not as I do, Cabrera elects to leave the outpost to enjoy the simple pleasure of watching the clouds, without the noise of other people's existence. In an effort to improve their early warning systems, the group run along the electrical cable under the ground, so that they can place down CCTV cameras further out into the landscape. With no more steel available within a safe distance, the group turn their attention to mining out more space for themselves within their shelter. It won't help protect them from the ducks, but it might make the next few days of survival a little more bearable. The next morning, as the group are mining away in the shelter and enjoying a spot of breakfast outside in the rapidly warming morning air, they hear the danger approaching, a little too late. It's unclear how many ducks there are, but they've given up the element of surprise by approaching the outpost from the closed-off south side. The group race towards the front defences, taking potshots at any ducks they spy through the palisade walls. As the ducks will approach from the south, they may be upon the defences before the group can fire on them, so they take the tactical decision to move away from the defences and out into the field, where they hope to be able to take shots at the ducks from a greater distance. There are quite a number of the beasts this time, but thankfully they approach the group in a very disordered fashion, very surprising for a group of ducks. The disorder of the ducks allows the group to lure them into the firing range of the turrets, helping to take them all out without any casualties to the group. Unfortunately, clearing them out does take quite a while, as the ducks are slowly filing towards the defences one by one. With the ducks dealt with, the group return to their mining project. It's not of great importance, but it gives the group something to work towards, to keep their minds off the dire situation. Lynn is only too happy to help out, keeping everyone's moods high by drawing pictures of the outpost's de facto mascot, Marcel Mushroom. And, by Marcel's blessing, the side project yields some amazing results, as the group unexpectedly unearth another vein of steel in the very walls of the outpost itself. Now they can build out their defences even further. As the day goes by, Trev brings a worrying realisation to the group's attention. They don't have enough food to last the remaining days. They had grabbed as many packaged survival meals as they could before they left the city, but evidently it hadn't been quite enough. They had no time to grow any additional food, which left only one option: the ducks. They already had a supply of them nearby from the previous days, and they would be ample to keep them fed until the ship arrived. But would eating the infected ducks have adverse consequences on the humans? Well, given the choice between that uncertainty and the certainty of starvation, they decided that they had to risk it. To this end, they quickly threw together a butcher's table and a stove to cook on. Thanks to the discovery of the extra steel, Cabrera starts the next day so happy that he's feeling inspired. But the world soon sees to that. While most of the group are still rousing from their sleep, the turrets begin spinning up, a warning to all that danger is near. Peering through the fences, Cabrera sees a ridiculous horde of ducks approaching, and quickly calls everyone to the defences. The group fire wildly into the horde. Given its size, missing a shot is a statistical impossibility. But it is a numbers game, and even with the help of their turrets, there's no way they can take them all out before they reach the outpost. As the group pull back within the walls to put more distance between them and the ducks, Trev shouts a warning to the children to stay inside the shelter and lock the door. Sure enough, the ducks manage to make it inside the walls of the outpost, but the defences have done their job well, and slowed by the barricades, the ducks can only manage to trickle into the outpost one by one, giving the group a good opportunity to take them out before they get too close. Well, theoretically anyway. One does get a little too close to Lumpy and starts trying to savage him. Thankfully his armour protects him, and his rifle doubles up quite effectively as a clubbing weapon. The rest get taken down without any further injury, but this is a worrying sign. They need to hold out longer, and if hordes any larger than that arrive, they're going to be in some serious trouble. With the morning's attack still fresh in their minds, the group know they need to spend the day improving their defences. They begin by building a new line of barricades to further slow the ducks, along with 2 additional automated turrets to help contend with the sheer numbers that are showing up. The upside of having little else to do is that the group already have the second line of barricades erected by the next day, and as the sun rises, Cabrera works on installing one of the new turrets. Moments after he finishes, his timing is proven to be perfect as the southern turret spins up and begins firing. Looking across the barricades, Cabrera spots an ungodly horde of ducks approaching and races to get everyone in position. The children, now equipped with Hail Mary clubbing weapons, are ordered to stay in the shelter. With the sheer number of ducks approaching, there is little advantage to be had in strategy. The group line up and simply try to fire off as many shots as they can, hoping that the defences do their job of slowing the horde long enough that they can release enough bullets. The horde is simply overwhelming, and the group are forced once more to retreat to try and open up enough space between them and the ducks, but they don't have far to run before their backs are up against the shelter. The fight becomes a slugging match, the outcome to be determined by whoever is more incompetent. The ducks lack organisation, but the group lacks shooting skill. It takes a few hours, but eventually the group emerge victorious, atop a mountain of duck corpses. Given the sheer volume of corpses now littering the outpost, Trev begins to worry about the decay. The last thing they need is for the group to get lung rot and be unable to make the final dash to the extraction point. As such, he suggests trying to relocate as many of the corpses as possible to an area outside of the outpost's walls. As well as reducing the risk of lung rot, this will also give the children something to do to keep them busy. It might cost them a fortune in therapy bills, but that was future Trev's problem to deal with, assuming they made it out of this alive. They still had to survive one more day, and with the hordes getting ever larger, their only real option was to extend out the defences further. They were still limited to wood and turrets, but that would have to do. The kids were making slow progress in shifting all the corpses, but given how little time they had left to hold out for, they may just get away with it, as many of the corpses had not yet begun to rot. The next morning, Cabrera was ready and waiting for the horde. He'd learned the timings and knew when to expect them. Nothing could have prepared them for how many there would be, though. This was undoubtedly their toughest challenge yet. The new defences they'd planned out the previous day were still far from complete, but they would have to make do. The group made dangerously little impact on the horde before they reached the defences. It was destined to be another extremely dangerous encounter. One duck got close enough to take a few pecks at Cabrera. Usually this would be an issue, but combined with the food poisoning he had from eating the cooked duck, which was a potentially disastrous discovery but one that they couldn't afford to dwell on right now, he was struggling to retreat at a decent pace. With the group having their backs against the shelter, the children inside could only wonder as to what their fate would be, as they sat inside being bombarded by the sounds of gunfire and avian death throes. They clutched their clubs tight and hoped for the best. It was a war of attrition, and it was not over quickly. Thankfully, the ducks were single-mindedly determined to taste human flesh, which meant that they ignored the turrets and the defences, allowing the turrets to continue exacting a toll on the ducks every step of the way, thinning out the horde just enough that the humans managed to win out the day. It was close to the extraction window, meaning there was little advantage to building further defences. With over 200 duck corpses now littering the landscape, clearing out a safe route for them to leave the base and reach the evac was the primary concern. With the kids clearing out corpses, those in need of treatment for duck-related injuries or food poisoning were tended to ensure they had the best chance of making it to the evac. Horrifyingly, hauling hundreds of duck corpses had clearly awakened a deep interest in their kind in young Monty, and, despite the presence of cooked meals in the fridge, she sat down at the table with a raw duck corpse and began tearing into it with her teeth. This was some horrifying nonsense that the group would have to deal with later, when they had a second to breathe. As the group were trying to ignore Monty, they saw two streaks of smoke cross the sky, and the earth rumble as two large drop pods landed a short distance from the outpost. Two soldiers emerged, armed and ready to receive the group. Now all they had to do was run. For all their planning, they really hadn't discussed how they would go about reaching the evac, so as the drop pods touched down, there was a shout of "Run!" and everyone in the group broke into a sprint heading straight for the pods. With safety so close, they weren't waiting another second. Today, however, the ducks had decided to launch an assault with their full strength, and massive hordes approached from all sides. The group had no chance of defeating them. All they could do was run and pray that the soldiers could keep the ducks at bay long enough for the pods to take flight. Despite his recent bout of food poisoning, Cabrera led the charge, with Lumpy taking up the rear guard. Unfortunately, little Lynn was falling behind, so Lumpy stopped running for a moment to try and draw the ducks towards him and give Lynn a chance to escape. In a daring feat of bravery, Cabrera ignored the soldiers holding off the ducks and immediately dived straight into the safety of one of the pods, leaving the soldiers to fend for themselves. Not interested in having one of the pods leave without them and strand them on this hellish planet, the soldiers tried to return to the pods too. One made it, but the other was too swamped fighting off the ducks and had to keep moving further away. Trev was next to arrive, and, despite having to weave between a number of the beasts and taking a fair few hits in the process, he managed to get himself into the second pod. Lumpy arrived next, just as the second soldier was getting completely surrounded to the north. Lumpy dived headfirst into the horde, looking to keep them busy so that the civilians could escape. The situation was becoming increasingly precarious, however. Monty managed to make a dash past the horde, but was still confronted by a few angry ducks. She thankfully managed to duke her way past them with only minor injury, joining Cabrera and the soldier on the first pod. Things are going pretty poorly for everyone else though. Along with Lumpy, Lynn is also down, having been unable to outrun the horde to the south. Sanford had also hit the ground after being surrounded on all sides and being unable to push through the horde. The group considered making a dash from their pods to rescue who they could, but they quickly came to the conclusion that they couldn't save anyone and would only be throwing themselves into the grinder needlessly. With a heavy heart, the few survivors started the launch sequence and left the squabbling hordes of blood-soaked ducks behind, along with some of their friends and family.